Hello and welcome back to Ef2000 Retro. I actually didn't plan to make this video, but as there were a couple of questions that frequently re-emerged, I thought it wouldn't be the worst idea to clarify some of the most frequently asked questions. I also got the suggestion to create effects, so here it is. I apologize in advance that this video isn't too well prepared and the footage you see in the background is not necessarily related to what I'm talking about. But in order to not let you get too bored by just listening, I have included some footage, and here and there it will also match with what I'm talking about. So let's start with the first question, which is how is the Ef2000 aircraft implemented in Falcon BMS and more specifically in Ef2000 Retro? How realistic is it? How authentic is it? How high fidelity is it? This question really emerged most often, so let's start with it first. I don't want to spread false hopes or create some fake illusions. Falcon BMS is first and foremost an F-16 combat flight simulator, which simulates the F-16 quite well, very realistic, and with the exception of the 15C, which has been introduced as a second aircraft type besides the F-16 with customs high-fidelity systems modeling, all other aircraft are essentially relying on the F-16's high fidelity systems modeling, and so of course does the Ef2000. Nevertheless, there are quite a lot of customization options that you have. It starts with the external 3D models and skins, of course, that's basic, but there is also some logic behind the 3D model itself, be it the scale or relative size of the object, the related collision models. External lights are implemented that way, and for the Ef2000 the external lights are, so to speak, to 100% accurate, at least for German and Spanish Trench 2-3 standard aircraft. There are a few little deviations on Italian and British aircraft. These aren't simulated yet. It might, of course, be something I can look into for the future. Also other aspects such as the refueling probe, the drag chute, the emergency arrestor hook are essentially model related features, but they're also driven by certain data and certain data files. So that kind of stuff has to be integrated, implemented, and it can be tailored on an aircraft basis. The same is true for the animations of the control surfaces. They are not random. There's also logic behind their movements, and to a certain extent you can customize this on an aircraft basis, and for the Ef2000 this has of course been done. Then comes general aircraft data, such as mass and fuel load data. You can even adjust the signatures. These are not particularly well simulated in Falcon BMS anyway at this point in time, and there are no real data available for the Ef2000. So there wasn't really much work done at all. I've slightly altered the radar signature of the aircraft, but it's not necessarily accurate. It's just in relation to some other aircraft as a reference. The weapon loadouts are actually based on real-world weapon loadouts. There are some exceptions. The PV4 is not available, for example, in the database. It could be implemented once it is available as a substitute. The GB49 enhanced PV2 is used, for example. And there are also some weapons that are not yet integrated on the real aircraft, and some that have been associated with the real aircraft but that were never integrated. But it's for gameplay purposes. Of course, you can flexibly alter the weapon loadouts as you like, so they can be highly realistic or complete fantasy. For Ef2000 Retro, it's based on real-world weapon loadouts with some additional weapon options, but the loadout quantities, positions are realistic in this respect. Definitely you can use all weapons that the aircraft can carry, so there are no weapons that can only be used by the AI or that are just eye candy. The aircraft has its own gun with parameters matching the real BK-27 gun. Some gun sight options. These are the gun sights available to the F-16, but there are plenty of gun sights. I think 4 in total available for the F-16, but you can enable or disable them individually, and I've only selected 2 which best match those air-to-air gun sights used by the real Ef2000 aircraft. It's not 100% accurate, but the best match. And that's also a general thing. You have a lot of avionics options that you can customize, where you can select whether a system is available at all. You can enable or disable specific HUD indications, for example. You can, for some systems, define functions such as specific radar modes, whether they are available, not available. You can, for a couple of systems, also adjust operating or performance parameters, and these have where data information is available, of course, being changed, updated, implemented as realistically as possible based on what is being adjustable, and of course based on data and information availability. The cockpit, as you can see, is accurately representing the cockpit of a real Ef2000 aircraft. Yes, this cockpit is quite old, it's not new, it wasn't optimized for VR usage, but the feedback I've received is that it works in VR. I personally don't have use VR gear, so I cannot really comment on it and have to rely on the feedback I receive for this. The cockpit has its limitations, and of course a new one would be desirable in the future, and maybe there will be a new cockpit in the future, but I cannot make any promises on that yet. It's way too early, but I don't rule it out. Let's phrase it this way. The current cockpit has, of course, certain limitations in its functionality, but there's definitely some room for growth. The cockpit is thus far fully functional in terms of switch positions. I mean, the hotspots on which you can click, so almost every control in the cockpit has a function assigned, but you have little visual feedback on it at the moment. That's also something that can be worked on, but I will make a dedicated video about the cockpit anyway. So I don't want to dive too deep into the details. Important to say is that the controls have been mapped as realistically as possible, but as we are limited to F-16 cockpit functionality, there are of course certain omissions and compromises that have to be made, but I think it's relatively close overall. But with no custom avionics simulation for the Ef2000 in particular, there are limitations, but through the cockpit itself you can emulate specific avionics system functions, mostly indicators and where they appear and how they appear. So this can be done, and this of course helps to improve the immersion when flying, operating the aircraft. There have also been some custom audio and voice warnings implemented for the Ef2000. These are not all encompassing or exhaustive, but they also help to boost immersion a little bit and create a more Ef2000 specific feel. And of course, there's the advanced flight model, and you will simply notice the Ef2000 flies quite different compared to the F16. So it handles differently, it performs differently, and the flight model has been tuned to be as realistically as possible, but within the given constraints, so it's also not 100% accurate, perfect. Not all data information are available, and there's definitely also room for improvement. So advanced flight model updates are also being planned in the future. Then we have relatively good implementation of the aircraft's racks, but I don't want to dive into the details at this point. Everything being said before is just a broad overview, but it should outline that quite a lot of work on the F2000 aircraft's implementation has been done, that you are not really exactly flying the F16 as such, so there are a lot of differences. You will notice them if you pay attention to the details, but also the questions that here and there emerge from the community simply highlight that it's not exactly the F16 that you are flying, despite of the commonalities. But that being said, the F16 is a fourth generation multi-role fighter like the F2000, and especially the later models that are simulated in Falcon BMS are technologically not that different to the F2000. So there's a great overlap also in systems availability and systems capabilities, for example. And yes, it doesn't quite look like the Ef2000 with F16 avionics, of course, but there's a lot of customization. You will, for example, notice a distinct difference in radar performance, despite the radar looking the same, but the performance is quite different, and this applies to the one or other system in general. And for the head-up display, for example, you have a lot of configuration options, what symbols are being shown or not shown. This was originally designed to simply represent different F16 versions, but it's completely configurable, not only for the F16 but for every single other aircraft, and the same applies to many other systems, for example, whether an improved data modem or MIDS Link 16 tactical data link is available, whether you're using monochrome or colored MFDs, whether they are of CRT or LCD type, and so on. So there are a lot of options to customize, and if you have enough information about an aircraft available, you can of course tailor those settings to best match the capabilities of the real aircraft. In future videos I will of course dive a little bit deeper into diverse details. For the general facts this should be sufficient. And so the answer whether it's custom systems modeling, no, it is customized, but it's not Ef2000 specific in terms of it's really the man-machine interface that you will experience. That not at the moment. Will it come in the future? I can't promise it. I can't tell it. In fact, because much depends on what development priorities are, and that's not related to me, as I'm just a third-party modder, not part of the BMS team itself. So only time will tell. Of course, I would welcome such a custom systems modeling for the Ef2000, just like everybody else, and of course would support such a development if somehow possible. But for the moment, it's not there. I wouldn't directly count or bet on it that it will ever emerge. I don't know. But it is at least theoretically possible. In future videos I will dive a little bit deeper into certain details, so stay tuned for these. This video is already quite a little bit long. For the future, as I was also asked about the roadmap, or is there a roadmap, what's on the roadmap, I have already outlined there's growth potential. I don't have a particular roadmap in terms of I want to do this or that at that time or in that sequence. Much depends on how much time I have. I can allocate at a certain point in time, because if you're working on a particular task, it's always good if you are able to work on it continuously and not be interrupted over and over again, because that is very frustrating and time consuming. I have already outlined before in relation to how the Ef2000 aircraft is implemented that there is room for growth, and that I will definitely continue to work on certain aspects. This includes cockpit improvements, of course, also advanced flight model updates, and as far as the Ef2000 Retro add-on as a whole is concerned, implementation of AI-controlled aircraft has not been optimized by myself so far. I essentially inherited it from how it was implemented in the other fighters mafias database, and there's here and there, of course, some optimization potential. Training missions can, of course, be improved. Additional training missions could be created, scripts could be created. It doesn't have the highest priority for me at the moment. If somebody finds bugs or says this or that should be changed in a training mission, if it is really of relevance to the playability or executability of training missions, then let me know. This will of course take precedence. But training missions in general are not a subject I have spent too much time with. But it's definitely also an area that could be improved. Creating some single missions is also an option, and I invite everybody to let his ideas flow and contribute. You can actively contribute. I think mission making is also time consuming, it's work, but that's at least something that is achievable. So everybody who has good ideas for Ef2000 related missions, single missions in particular, you're welcome to also contribute actively. Of course, there's also room for more campaigns. There are 3 unused slots available, so to speak. So I also invite people, if you have ideas, if you say, okay, I want to make a campaign for Ef2000 Retro, you're of course welcome as well. I can of course also offer support for this various different tasks, and can of course do this myself as well, but as said, I'm just a single man. Time is not infinite for me as for everybody else, and working on everything is of course not possible at one point in time. And yeah, if there's too much, it simply becomes a very lengthy process. So um, don't expect that everything that's proposed here will come yet that soon or anytime soon. Some things may emerge earlier, some may come later, and they will probably be simply also split across multiple updates. And if there are bigger changes, or if I feel there are too many updates, patches available, then I will simply consolidate them and package them into a re-release of a version, whatever this version number would be then, so that it could be downloaded as a single package rather than installing thousands of updates one after another on top of the base install. So these are essentially the questions that were most frequently asked. In fact, not too many. At the time being, if more emerge, I could make another video, or simply what I intend to do anyway, also write down a fact and post it at least on the Discord server of Ef2000 Retro. This one could then of course be extended over time if required. I don't plan to make frequent videos about facts as such, unless there's maybe really pressing questions that may need some longer clarification, I'd say. But over the time I will produce various videos anyway, and as already um, suggested, you can of course ask for specific topics to be covered by future videos, so I can focus on individual aspects, and hopefully these videos will therefore not be as long as this one. That being said, the following videos will be instructional tutorial types of videos, as they have also been requested and as I were always planned, so stay tuned for real videos, not just plain talking videos in the near future. Bye.